Welcome to the lab. This is the Big Scientist channel where we explore the why so you know how. Today, we are discovering the why of turning these 4 simple ingredients into delicious, chewy, soft bagels. If you want to learn the science behind these bagels, stay tuned, make sure to subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay up to date on all the delicious science. Now let's get into it. So we're going to go ahead and start off with some science. So today we're going to be actually using a technique called yudane in this bagel recipe. And yudane is similar, it's an Asian bread making technique that is actually similar to the tangzhong technique that we use in our cinnamon roll video, our remix cinnamon roll video. So if you haven't seen that, please check it out. And in that video, we did talk about how the technique is used to gelatinize some of the starches in the flour, which helps to absorb more moisture, more water, and that water holds moisture in the dough, and it results in a moist, more tender baked good. And today we're using a technique called yudane, which does essentially the same thing, but in a different way. So when you use tangzhong, you typically cook the flour and the water together to make a roux on the stove. And it's a different proportion of flour to water. Whereas with yudane, which we're using here, you pour boiling hot water over top of the equal amounts of flour. So 1 part water, 1 part flour, same amounts. So here I use 75 grams of flour and 75 grams of water, boiling hot water. And so I poured that over and you just mix it until you get this paste. And we're doing this first because we do want it to cool before we add it to our dough mixture. And what you're looking for, like I said, is a paste. And this paste is the starch molecules that have gelatinized. And as we spoke about previously in our cinnamon roll video, the starch molecules gelatinize when they absorb excess water, and they swell and burst and release gel molecules into the surrounding liquid, which helps to create a gel and a paste, which is what we want. We want that, that'll help hold more moisture in our dough. And because bagels are traditionally a drier dough, this will actually help them to stay a little bit softer longer and be a little more chewy. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to blooming our yeast. And as we've done in previous bread videos, I like to use active dry yeast, and that needs to be bloomed prior to adding to your dough mixture. And not only to make sure it's alive, but also to give the yeast a head start and wake it up so that it can start activating and producing the carbon dioxide it needs to in our dough. So here I've added 2 tablespoons of brown sugar to warm water. It doesn't need to be hot, boiling, it just needs to be warm. And then I stirred that in and let it dissolve, and also I'm stirring in the yeast, and we want to give the yeast a nice warm sugary environment to wake up into, so that really helps to activate them so that they are ready to work in our mixture for us. Once the yeast is dissolved, just go ahead and set it aside for about 5 minutes to let it bloom. As you can see here, it's bloomed. When it blooms, you can see that you get a nice frothy top, and that's what you want to see. That's when you know your yeast is alive and ready to go. So here in my mixing bowl, I just have the rest of the flour, the brown sugar, and the salt. And so I'm going to go ahead and add the cooled off yudane. And you just want to scoop that in. Once all the yudane has been added to the dough mixture, now we can go ahead and add in our yeast and water mixture. So just pour that straight in. And that's really all the ingredients that there are for these bagels. And now we're going to go ahead and start mixing it or kneading it with our stand mixer. And this dough is a very dry dough, so it will be a little tough mixing wise for the mixer. So I'm not going to mix it completely with the mixer. I'm going to just mix it enough to where the flour is incorporated to a ball, and then we're going to knead the rest by hand. And the reason why bagels tend to have a drier dough is because they have lower moisture. And the reason for that is that bagels themselves are supposed to be dense. They're supposed to have a very tight crumb and be very dense and chewy. In order to be dense and chewy, they are going to have less moisture. But because they have less moisture, they do tend to stale or get hard a little faster than most bread products, especially if you buy a fresh bagel from a bagel shop or you make them homemade. You've probably experienced that after a few hours to even a day, they get really hard. And because we're using science on this channel, I've decided to use yudane to try to interject a little bit more moisture into the dough, so that the bagels have a little bit more moisture inside of the denseness, so that they can hold on to a little bit moisture longer and stay a little bit softer a little longer. It's not going to add enough moisture to the point where it's going to be like super fluffy, because that's not what we want in our bagel. We still want that dense crumb, but we do want it to stay moist long enough for us to be able to enjoy softer bagels for at least a few days, not just a few hours. So that's the goal with this experiment, of adding the udon to this bagel mixture, and that will hopefully give the end product a little bit more moisture to stay shelf stable a little bit longer, and give us a few more days of a softer interior before it becomes really hard. And so, because like I mentioned, this dough is pretty dense and dry, I did want to knead it by hand instead of in my stand mixer, so the motor doesn't get too overworked. But as you can see, it's not sticky at all. I'm using gloves and it's not sticking to my gloves at all. It does look a little bit shaggy, and that's fine. The more you work it, the more the water is going to incorporate the dry flour bits. So just keep working the dough and it will incorporate all the little bits of flour eventually. It does look kind of scary now, but trust me, just keep working it and it'll get there. What you're looking for is your dough to become smooth and just nice and supple, and all the little bits will be incorporated. There won't be any dry spots. And that's really all you want to do, is you just want to keep working the dough until you get to that point. And it did take me quite a while. It took about probably 10 minutes or so to knead it to that point, but it's not too bad. You can do this whole process by hand. You don't have to use a stand mixer. I just did because I tend to not like things sticking to my hands too much, so I use the stand mixer for the kind of the wetter part, and now I'm just gonna knead it by hand for the rest of the way. I would like to take a moment to say, if you love this content and learning the science behind your favorite baked goods and understanding what's going on and how it works and how the science is affecting your end product and what you can do to alter your end product or make it better or just experiment in the kitchen, then please go ahead and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can stay up to date on all the science that's coming out of our kitchen. We love this, making this content and sharing the science with everyone, and it's really cool to see the science of your favorite food and to understand the why so you know how. Now that we've got the dough where we want it, it's nice and soft and all the dry bits have been incorporated. We're gonna go ahead and grease a bowl and then place our dough ball into the bowl so that it can rise for about an hour and a half to 2 hours, or just until it doubles in size. So here my dough ball is, it's about doubled in size, so it's ready to get shaped into bagels. So what we're gonna do is we're going to remove it from the bowl, and then we're going to, I like to weigh my dough, so we're gonna weigh the dough just so we have an accurate amount for each dough ball. I like to make them all pretty consistent so that they cook at the same rate. So if you haven't already, please check out our baking basics video on how to measure, so you can effectively use your kitchen scale, or you can eyeball it and just cut it into however many pieces that you want. But like I said, I like to measure mine just so that they're all even and they all cook at the same rate when we're ready to start baking them. I decided to make my bagels a little bit smaller in size, so I made each about 75 grams, give or take a gram or two for each dough ball. And this gave me 16 bagels. So if you want to make them bigger or smaller, that's up to you. And again, you don't have to use a scale. You can always eyeball it and just cut them into equal sized pieces. But I went ahead and made them a little bit smaller just so I could get a little bit more bagels out of it. And like I said, that it gave me about 16 bagels. And what you want to do once you have the size that you want to roll them into balls and set them aside covered so they don't dry out, and they'll be prepared for us to form into bagels. So here I have all of my dough balls made, so we're going to go ahead and shape them. The method I tried out for shaping them seemed to work pretty efficiently, and it was pretty easy, so I'll go ahead and show you how to do that now. So I take a dough ball and I flatten it just a little bit with the palm of my hand. And then I take my thumb and I stick it through the middle until I can feel the table underneath my thumb. So I push it down until I feel the table. And then I'll pick it up and open up the hole with my other fingers and roll it around my fingers until the hole kind of expands. And you want to apply even pressure around as you're doing this, just to make sure that the hole is even and it's not kind of lopsided or anything like that. You also want to make the hole a little bit bigger than you are thinking it needs to be for your bagel, because as the bagel cooks and as it rises a little bit more when we put in the water bath, it will the hole will close up. So you don't want to make it too small, because then you won't have a hole at the end when the bagel's ready to be baked. And you don't want to make it too big, because you don't want to thin out the edges and destroy the integrity of the actual shape of the bagel. So here I'm going to show you a few more times on how I make this bagel shape. So again, just flatten it with the palm of my hand and then stick my thumb through the middle of the bagel until I can feel the countertop underneath. And I just give it a little twist so to kind of break the dough so that I can feel the table, and then pull it apart a little bit and just stretch it with your fingers by rolling it with even pressure around your fingers. So once you have all your bagels shaped, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna actually let these sit in the fridge overnight. And the reason for this is because the longer that they sit, they actually develop a little bit more flavor from the yudane, the starches. Just sitting, they develop more flavor. So I want to get that extra flavor in there, along with give the bagels as much of that moisture that they can get from the udon. So I want them to sit as long as they can. And this is perfect if you want to make these in the morning so you can have fresh bagels. As the next step really is just baking them, boiling and baking them. So that's the easy part. So it makes it a nice way to kind of have fresh bagels the next day, or in a few days. You don't have to bake them the next day. You can actually let these sit up to 2 days in the fridge before baking them. So that's what I decided to do, but you can go ahead and boil and bake these right away after shaping them. I just liked the extra flavor they did have from letting them sit and kind of cure, if you will say. So I just covered these in some plastic wrap and then covered them tightly with a kitchen towel to make sure that they didn't get any air on them, so they didn't dry out. And then I stuck them in the fridge overnight, and we're going to go ahead and move on to the next step of the science in the morning with boiling. So the morning that I want to go ahead and bake my bagels, we're going to first create our water bath for the bagels. So we want to boil some water, and in the water, you don't really have to add anything to the water, but I like to add a tablespoon of brown sugar, and that helps to give the bagel a little bit more flavor and also develop a little bit more of that brown color. And the molasses from the brown sugar does give it a little bit more of a bagel-y flavor than just plain water. And again, you can still just use plain water. It'll give you the same result, just you might not have a little that color that it would add, and just the little tiny bit of extra flavor. Not much, but just a little bit. So you just want to dissolve that sugar in the water and then go ahead and bring it to a boil. And you don't want it to be like a raging boil. You just want it to be pretty much like almost like a simmer kind of boil, and that's what you're gonna boil your bagels in. So you want it to get to that point. So we're just gonna go ahead and heat up our water and also preheat our oven to 425 at this time. So now we're gonna go ahead and take our bagels out of the refrigerator from overnight. And you don't really have to let them sit out and warm up or proof or anything. You can go ahead and start right away with boiling the bagels. So I'm just showing you here what they look like. As I mentioned, they didn't really rise or anything in the fridge. The fridge was more for developing the flavors as they sit and kind of cure overnight. So the bagels are here, and we're gonna go ahead and get them in the boiling water so we can start baking. Now that our water is at a nice consistent boil, we can go ahead and start dropping in our bagels. And this is where some more science happens. So when we put our bagels into this boiling water, what we're doing was we're actually gelatinizing the starch on the outside of the outside of the bagel. So this pretty much pre-cooks some of those flour starch molecules on the outside of the bagel, which gives us a gummy kind of texture because we're gelatinizing it, but it also pre-cooks it, like I said. And as you know, when you gelatinize something, it's an irreversible process. So we've par-cooked the outside of the bagel, and so when we bake it, that par-cooked jelly structure will become like a crispy crust. So that's where you get the crust of the bagel. And what this does is the crust encompasses the outside of the bagel, and it keeps the inside of the bagel from expanding in the oven. Or like if you were to make a bread or something, how you get those big air pockets and it kind of expands as it bakes. Instead of getting that large expansion, where the crust is going to inhibit that, which is going to give us a tighter crumb, which is pretty characteristic of bagels, and it's also going to give us a denser bite, which is what we want. And because we added that yudane in, we're going to get a little bit more softness to it, and hopefully we're going to get it to last a little longer and be more shelf stable. And so I actually just let the bagel sit in the water for 30 seconds each side, so a minute total. So after 30 seconds, flip it over, let it sit for another 30 seconds, and then go ahead and take them out. And once you take them out, what we're going to do is, if you wanted to have a topping on your bagel, like I like everything bagels, so I'm going to take 1 egg and just beat it up with no water or anything and brush it onto the tops of your bagels. And even if you're not going to add a topping, this is a good step to have so that you can get a little bit more brown color on your bagels, if that's something you want. If not, you can go ahead without it. But since we're not using any kind of molasses or anything in the actual boiling water, which would give the bagels a little bit more color, it is nice to get a little bit more browning effect from the egg wash. And the brown sugar does add a little bit more color to the bagels, but if you like that dark brown color that a lot of the bagels you get from bakery shops have, then definitely add in the egg wash. And again, if you want to add a topping, add in the egg wash. So if you want to customize your bagels, like I said, I'm gonna put everything seasoning on half of these. But if you wanted to make, say, like onion bagels or something like that, you would add onion powder to your actual dough before you shape the dough balls. So after you've let the dough rise in that first rise that we did, and you cut them into your sizes that you want for your bagels, you would add in you'd add in the onion powder or whatever flavor you're going to add to your bagels at that point before you start shaping them into the individual bagels. Since I'm doing everything bagels, I didn't need to do that step, but if I want to do onion bagels or say even raisin bagels or things like that, you add those add-ins before you shape your bagels and let them sit in the fridge. So here I am just sprinkling on the everything seasoning, and then we're gonna pop these in the oven and bake up some bagels. So now let's go ahead and stick these in the oven. And again, the oven was preheated at 425 degrees Fahrenheit. And we're going to bake these for about 15 to 20 minutes or until they're nice and golden brown. And here it is, the final result. Delicious, soft but chewy, crisp on the outside, savory bagels, fresh made bagels. And like I said, they're nice and crispy on the outside. And I'm going to go ahead and cut open one of these so we can actually see what the interior looks like. And what we're looking for is a nice dense crumb, but also kind of a softer, chewy interior. So let's go ahead and cut one open and see what it looks like. As you can see, the interior is nice and dense like we expect. You can see that crust that we developed on the outside from the gelatinization in the water bath. And it's nice and soft on the inside. And I will say that these bagels did last pretty well. They were soft for about 3 days before I ended up eating them all. But they were soft for about 3 days, just hanging out on the counter in a tightly sealed Ziploc bag. But if you have a airtight container, that probably works even better. So definitely try out the yudane technique if you make bagels at home, and let us know what you think. Please subscribe and let us hit the notification bell to stay up to date on all delicious science. Until next time, happy baking!